Welcome to EPG Pathashala lecture series for MArch students. This is on planting design. In this particular series, we will look at plants as structural and also spatial elements, and we would consider a few factors as to how these plants play a significant role in the structural evolvement of a particular space, and what are the kinds of spaces that it could create and how it could affect the different factors. Under this particular heading, we would look at the designer's viewpoints of plants as such, and also we would also see plants as structural and spatial elements. Then we would see plants selection, and then we would look at plants with respect to their the functional and the aesthetical considerations that it could bring into the entire design process as itself. The designer's viewpoint of plants is very important, as it is very important how a designer views plants as themselves. We saw that plants are living materials, and they always contribute to the environment in which it is being put, and the landscape designer needs to understand the essentials or the plant characteristics, which character itself, maybe it's the botany of a particular botanical qualities of a particular plant. It needs to be familiar, and also he needs to be familiar with certain basics of the ecological value that a particular plant could bring into any particular system, and also it should be able to understand and use the appropriate techniques, and also with respect to horticulture, agriculture or forestry in the different scales of projects that the designer involves himself. And it is also important that the designer himself has a sculptor's eye, the kind of architect, the design inclination, and also the aesthetical inclination to any particular project, so that it gives out the best aesthetical pleasure. Maybe it would he would need a sculptor's eye or a painter's expressive hand, or even a florist at some times, probably to add that small finishing touch to any particular plant. So landscape designers do need to understand the quality of any particular plant, because plant have a particular kind of structure, and also with respect to their structure, they also create a particular kind of space in their environment. To the designer, plants are like green building blocks that can be assembled to form living and changing structures in the landscape. As we see, in the plants are living materials, they change in the way that their structure changes in the living environment, and it is it's just like as we use any particular brick block or a stone block, plants are also can be used as materials themselves to create that kind of space, to create that kind of structure in the particular environment that we are looking at. It is essential to understand the structural quality of the material here being a living material, that is plants themselves, and also the kind of spaces that they create within and without their domain. So whatever plants not only contribute to themselves, that not only that they have their own structure as such, but also it also gives its own contribution to the area that surrounds it. Probably it could be a forest, probably it could be a plaza, it could be a small courtyard itself, but still plants do have a spatial consideration, and it also does perform its function in the place that is being put in. Plants as structural and spatial elements. Design, it is important to understand that design is not only about the form of solid structures, and also however it is important also to understand that even the empty spaces that are surrounding a particular solid form, that also defines or creates a certain kind of space. We could look at a particular tree over here which has a particular kind of structure. It is not only that the form as structure of the tree, but also at the same time it creates a canopy space around it. The tree creates a canopy space around it. Not only the tree has a particular form, but also there is a space that is being created around the tree, as well as the space that is being created below the particular tree itself. Considering a particular avenue where you have a particular space where there is more than one element, or maybe one or two trees which are there, an avenue, a series of trees lined on either side, they also create a particular kind of form to the particular structure, as well as it also creates a space below it. And so we could see that plants not only are structural elements themselves, not only that they have their own form, but also by proper use or proper arrangement of these plants, we could also make them or use them effectively as spatial elements in the landscape. And it is a space that has both and make it as a space that has both the functional and the aesthetical purposes well achieved in the particular design process or in the designed intent that we really look at in a particular project as such. Plants also define and create space. The space is created around, between, and even within their canopies. Planting form and outdoor spaces can be seen at a variety of scales. We could look at planting forms and varieties of scales right from a huge township even to a small courtyard space, and by proper use of the right kind of plant, we could create that particular structure for a plant, or the spatial character of the plant can be brought out in such a way so that it performs that kind of right function, and it creates that right kind of well designed or well proportioned space as such. But all this is possible when we start to look at the characteristics of plants, and also start to appreciate the individual structural quality of a particular plant. So we come to it again, and we see that plants are structural and spatial elements, and then even a single tree can define a space and can identify a space. It does not necessarily have to be a group of shrubs or even a layer of a ground cover, but also even a single tree as such can create a particular kind of space or create or it can influence a particular kind of space under its own domain. So it is very important that we create the right kind of influences that we intend to in the planting design process itself. By organizing and manipulating foliage canopies, the designer uses plants to build a structure, or what we might call a framework, that defines and orders spaces in the landscape. Whereas however we order it, however we arrange a particular space or a tree as such, it defines the kind of structure that we are creating, and also it defines the space in terms of its vertical proportions, in terms of its width, in terms of what is the character of the space, or else it could create also frameworks to look at beautiful sceneries that are well beyond the domain of a particular user, or right behind his property. We could use plants to create that kind of a framework. So it's not only about creating structures as such, but also it is also bringing a certain kind of system where we could we can bring in the spatial quality of a particular plant and use it to the maximum, so that the right kind of spaces or the right kind of design is being achieved in any particular project, so that it gives the best results for the planting designer as well as for the user himself. Further seeing plants as structural elements, we could slightly go on to a bigger scale, where at the largest belts of trees, woodlands and forest fragments can form a landscape framework within which large scale uses such as industry, residential and recreation can be accommodated without too much visual or ecological disruptions. So plants can also be looked at not only as an individual tree, not as a group of trees, but in terms of huge or large communities where they thrive as woodlands, where they thrive as forest, and also this entire thick canopy that is there, it has a form in itself. At the same time, it also creates that understory space within it, and what it does is it also affects the microclimate of a particular space, and even wildlife even in terms of forest, it also benefits the wildlife, and also it plays a significant role in wildlife conservation and also the other areas as such. And other environmental benefits are also being brought about in these type of forest systems, where the space that is being created below the top layer of a particular forest contributes to the environment of the place as such. Now we could also look at a few sketches in which planting is being arranged. This we are looking at plans here in which planting has been arranged in a certain way, so that it creates that kind of barrier or the enclosure as such, and also it creates, so it's not only about the vertical spaces, it's also the horizontal spaces, the boundaries that is being created, the vastness, whether it can vary from the from macro scale, or even coming down to a smaller courtyard where you have scope for just doing an edge planting or an edging as such in this particular aspect as such. So plants can be arranged in any way spatially, considering their structure, so that it creates or it gives the right kind of space for the creates the right kind of space for the user who is going to navigate or even live in that particular area. And also we could see that there are many levels of planting that could create spaces, something which is near the rear sides, creating the right kind of foreground and background. It can also, the density of planting that you can do in a particular area can actually reinforce or bring more highlight to a particular area and give more emphasis to a particular area. It can also create or even accent entry points. It can highlight areas and any kind of points. And also we can significantly arrange them, like as you see in this play area, that all the trees are arranged at the edges, and the canopy itself gives a good shade for a particular seating space or even for a small play area as such. So plants have different characters, whether it will be trees or even small shrubs or even ground covers. They can be used at various levels. Probably if you could see here that the ground cover gives a lot more depth to this arrival space, and we could understand that these significantly contribute to the spatial quality of the particular space as such. And also it's very important that the landscape designer is concerned about the detailed qualities also. Every architect or a designer always has a particular idea or the intent as to what the space should look like, and it is very important to understand what is the dimension of the plant, how big a plant grows, and how it could be, how that particular character or that particular aspect of a plant can be brought into the design, so that it adds to the dimension or to the proportions of the space itself, and it can be well set up in that particular area, so that the framework which is being framework that is being achieved suits along with the other elements as such.